Hello, and welcome to Veterans Today, a program by veterans for veterans. My name is Ralph Galati. I'm a former Air Force officer and Vietnam veteran. We have a truly extraordinary guest today in Patrick Murphy. He's a public servant, combat veteran, statesman, veteranpreneur, business executive, college professor. That suite of opportunities has shaped who he is today. We're going to talk to Patrick about his military experience, his multiple jobs, and how all of those have shaped his life, and hopefully describe how some of his experience could be helpful for you, our audience, our veterans, and family members. A little bit of background: ROTC, Army, 2 deployments to the Middle East, an attorney, member of Congress, Undersecretary of the Army, veteranpreneur, champion for veterans. Welcome to the program. We're going to try to cover all those backgrounds because I think your experiences will really be helpful to our audience.
Thanks, Ralph.
So let's start at the beginning. At age 19, you decided to go into college in Army ROTC. But you did have the option of just enlisting in the Army at that time. So what made you decide on the path that you picked?
Yeah, it's interesting. I went to community college full-time and then transferred to King's College. It's in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, Catholic college. My older brother was there playing hockey. And my roommate said, hey, you want to check out this Army ROTC program? We both were hustling. We were both working a couple odd jobs, side jobs, and looked into it. We wound up rappelling up the side of a mountain, within the first couple weekends. And you didn't have to sign up for it. I mean, they give you uniforms and they kind of teach you a little bit. But we both really enjoyed it. We were both athletes, and that's where I learned the difference between an officer and enlisted. I didn't know, my father was enlisted. My uncles served in Vietnam in the Army. They were both enlisted. My other uncle was a paratrooper, served during Korea. He was enlisted. So this is the first time I learned about what was an officer. Ralph, I apologize. I didn't know the difference growing up in Northeast Philadelphia when they had the Army-Navy game here in the city of brotherly love. I didn't know when it was Army versus Navy, they were both military academies. I thought it was a bunch of Army guys versus a bunch of Navy guys because I just didn't know. My parents didn't graduate college. For me, it was eye-opening. And then, to earn my commission, as a second lieutenant was just an awesome experience. I had read Colin Powell's book at the time called My American Journey. He became a role model because he grew up in a row house in Jamaica, part of New York City. Rose to the ranks, became a 4-star general and the chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff. So, not that I ever thought I'd be the chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff, but I was like, wow, he's a pretty awesome American, and I want to kind of be like him.
Yeah, but you knew you wanted to serve because you had a history, as you mentioned, of family members that wanted to serve. But being in college or community college also put you on that path to becoming an officer, and that kind of set you on the path that you ended up with.
Yeah, and that's why I feel so blessed. I mean, I think my parents instilled in my brother, sister, and I that servant's hearts. What the Bible talks about giving of yourself. What Dr. Martin Luther King said, when in doubt, you serve others. And that's where you'll find your purpose. Mm-hmm. And that was very powerful. And my mother was a Catholic nun. Luckily for me, she left the convent, met my father. They got married. Now, of course, I used to be in political public service. So, as a former politician, I would say she dumped Jesus for Jack Murphy. Okay. She does not like that. When she watches this Veterans Today, she's going to be very mad at me. But she left the convent. She was an Immaculate Heart of Mary nun, and then met my father, who was a Navy veteran at the time. Even though she left the church, she was at church every day at 6:30 Mass. She instilled that giving back to our community and giving back to our country is very important. Yeah. And it was through their action, not through their words. So, when there's a snowstorm, she kind of put the bug in my brother's and I's ears. Hey, go shovel Mrs. Deacon's steps across the street. We did that for free. And then my brother and I would shovel other steps to make some money. And even my father served after the Navy in the Philadelphia Police Department for 22 years. My uncles served, my cousin served. I have a cousin still serving in the Philadelphia Highway Patrol. In fact, I'll tell you one story. I'm sorry for being long-winded in the first question of yours. I talk about this in the book that I wrote. Growing up, when people's dad didn't wear a uniform, I thought they might be unemployed because in my neighborhood, part of Northeast Philadelphia, it was all cops and firefighters and mailmen, and so kind of wondering what the other dads did if they didn't have a uniform on.
Yeah, and the commitment to serve is interesting. I don't know about you, but folks have asked, do you think military service should be required of everybody? And I'm not so fond of that as I am. I really think public service of some kind should be required of everybody. As you could tell, it really does help shape your life if you do that early on.
And it shapes your life, and it gives you a different perspective. You go, you work side by side, and again, I agree with your premise. I do not want mandatory conscription in the military. I want folks that jump out of airplanes with me or go to places like Iraq to want to be there. But giving back for 2 years, either after high school or college or grad school, whether it's Teach for America or the Peace Corps, whatever it is, to give back, it does make you appreciate the greatness of America. And I always say our veterans, they serve, whether they do 3 years or 30 years, they come back and they want to be civic assets to this nation.
So let's talk about you go on active duty and you end up with the 82nd Airborne. Today's National Airborne Day. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I have an aversion to jumping out of a perfectly good airplane. But you did it for a living. What was that like?
It was awesome. When I joined at 19, I said I want to be an airborne ranger with the 82nd Airborne Division. My uncle, Joe Rapone, he served in the Army. He was in the 11th Airborne during Korea. He came back home here to Philadelphia, East Falls guy, and he eventually became an inspector in the Philadelphia Police Department. And then my father, Jack Murphy, his brother, Joe Murphy, both served. My dad during Vietnam in the Navy, my Uncle Joe in Vietnam. And then my mom's twin brother, Billy Rapone, was in the 101st Airborne Division in Vietnam and then came back, was with the 82nd Airborne Division. But even from day one, my Uncle Billy and my uncles, they were, you got to go airborne. And they would give me the cadences, just the sayings, and they still, to this day, have the 82nd Airborne, the wings, the airborne wings on their pickup truck. So to me, I knew that's what I wanted to do. It took me a little bit to get there. I mean, I had to earn that spot, but. Yeah.
But that's that fraternity or the sense of brotherhood that you pick up. And you served 2 combat tours. You got a Bronze Star. What was it like? What can our audience take from your experience serving not just in the military but in combat? What were you able to bring back into your civilian life?
It's I call it the row house mentality. It's taking care of people on your left and your right. Yes, I joined to serve my country. I love America. I love the fact that the blueprint of our nation is the U.S. Constitution. I got to teach that at West Point. In that preamble, that Constitution says, in order to form a more perfect union, we have a great country because we're a good country, but we're not perfect. That Constitution and our country, it's a living, breathing document that we got to make our country better for our kids and our grandkids every day. So bringing back that sense that we're blessed to live in the greatest country in the world, but it's also an awesome responsibility to give back to our community, to our families, and to our country.
Now, for folks that have members in the military that are listening or watching today, or that are thinking about enlisting, or maybe they're deployed and they're coming back, do you have any piece of advice to help them with this readjustment and transition? Because the DoD helps take civilians and makes them fighters. We don't do a great job, or is anybody's mission, to take those fighters and make them become back into civilian life again.
Yeah, as you know, for a few months, and I did my basic at Fort Knox, Kentucky. I remember running up hills, agony, misery. It was Agnes and it was misery running up them in the hot weather in Kentucky. But every year we do have about 250,000 veterans, 250,000 active troops that become veterans. And you helped them, Ralph. You're one of my personal role models. I'm out there, as an ambassador for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, talking to veterans and talking to corporate America about why veterans are civic assets, why you should hire them, why you should be veteran ready as a workforce. But I will say we don't do a great job at that transition. It takes us months to build you up to be a warrior, and then we'd have what we call SFL or Soldier for Life, or that TAP program, Transition Assistance Program. But really, it is. Let these great Americans know their time of serving our country isn't over. They might not wear the uniform anymore, Ralph, but they should be expected to be leaders of character, committed for a lifetime of service. And they do. I know we've talked about this in a private setting I get my Irish up when people try to make veterans out to be victims. Mm-hmm. And yes, we have an ethic, and we got to work on the suicide rate and the homelessness rate. But look at the other side of the coin. Veterans are more likely to be employed than civilians. They're more likely to start a small business than civilians. Those small businesses are more likely to be successful than civilians. They're more likely to vote in elections, no matter what their political persuasion, and they're more likely to be little league coaches or pastors in their churches. So they're these great civic assets, but we got to continue to ask them to go serve. Let them live a purpose-driven life.
Great. I'm going to look at the camera. For purposes of this audience, I think it's important to know that the positives that you brought up, plus your own example that we're going to get into of your multiple avenues of employment and opportunity, are significant, and that veterans really have that credential to do more than the average person. That experience, whether it's 2 years or 20 years, really serves them, their community, and their business well. I want to shift now to your job as a congressman. In 2007, you were elected to the United States Congress, serving Pennsylvania's 1st Congressional District. You were the first Iraqi war veteran to ever serve in Congress. What was that like? Was it a shock to you, what you saw?
Yeah, I joke. I wasn't a political science major. In fact, I was an independent most of my life, my adult life. It was a little bit of a shock. I mean, I worked my tail off to get there, but when I got there, I did pinch myself. And for the first, there's a saying in Congress, for the first 6 weeks you're there and you're like, wow, the U.S. Capitol is beautiful. The Supreme Court's down the street, the White House. You say, how did I get here? It was an awesome responsibility. I didn't know if I was, I barely won my first race. I mean, I was outspent by over $3 million. I was one of the poorest members of Congress. I mean, I had great credit, but I'm still paying my student loans off and stuff. So, but I remember I was going to make every day count. And to partner with folks like Tim Walz, who was a command sergeant major, now the governor of Minnesota, but we were freshman members of Congress together. We wrote things like the post 9/11 GI Bill. There's about 1.1 million young Americans in colleges and universities across America because of that post 9/11 GI Bill.
And for the audience, the post 9/11 GI Bill was different than the earlier versions of the GI Bill in a significant way, in that some of them, you could turn over some of those benefits to family members.
Right. So my brother, who served as an Air Force officer, did search and rescue down at Tyndall Air Force Base in Florida.
I knew you had something good about your family. It's the Air Force.
I always say Ralph was my little brother because he's Air Force, and the Air Force used to be the Army Air Corps, so you're part of the Army. But yeah, my brother did 2 deployments after 9/11. His daughter, because he already had his master's degree, he utilized the post-9/11 GI Bill that I co-authored for Katie Murphy, his daughter. Mm-hmm. And Katie Murphy got to go to Penn State University here for free under the GI Bill. Now, again, I shouldn't say for free because her father earned it, but she went for free. That's a pretty awesome opportunity that they earned, and they could pass it along, as you mentioned, to their kids.
So what else, other than that, what other achievement might you consider one of your biggest accomplishments while you were a member of Congress?
Well, I'd say locally, we have about 300,000 veterans in the southeastern part of Pennsylvania. I'm named after a guy, Patrick Ward. He was from Fairmount, went to Roman Catholic High School. He gave the ultimate sacrifice in Vietnam. He never made it home. His helicopter was shot down. And he's buried in Beverly, over in New Jersey. For decades and decades, politicians talked about bringing a veteran cemetery to southeastern Pennsylvania. So you didn't have to go to New Jersey, or you didn't have to go 2 hours away to Fort Indiantown Gap and then drive 2 hours home. We worked in a bipartisan way. I worked with my predecessor at the time in Congress and the former U.S. Senator Arlen Specter and our local officials to create the Arlington of southeastern Pennsylvania, what's called the Washington Crossing National Veteran Cemetery. It's in Washington Crossing, Bucks County. My next door neighbor, Bob Ron, is buried there. My father, he's still alive, but he'll go there. I'll go there. My brother, I think, will go there. It's a beautiful facility, and it's for veterans and their spouses to be there. And to me, that was pretty special. And I'd say a more national program that was more local, for our local 300,000 veterans and their families. But more nationally, I would say, listen, I'm an Irish Catholic, straight. I saw a lot of my brothers and sisters get thrown out of the military, Ralph, even after 9/11, just because of who they loved, because they were gay. And I thought it was wrong. And so I'm on the Armed Services Committee. I saw it firsthand. Congress passed this law. It was called Don't Ask, Don't Tell, which meant you can't say it, you can't tell. If someone says, hey, are you gay? You just got to keep your mouth shut. But if they hear a statement that you say you're gay, if they see some type of act or a video, or if they see a marriage certificate, it automatically would chapter them out of the military.
2010.
It was a wrong policy.
We will finally repeal the wrongful don't ask, don't tell policy. We will stand up for what is right. We will stand up for what is right.
Even after it was passed back in 1993, we kicked out over 13,000 troops, again, not for misconduct, but just because of who they loved. So I wrote the bill that repealed it. It was called the Murphy Amendment. We had hearings on it, and we got it done. And then at the time, President Barack Obama passed it into law. And it was the right thing to do. It was long overdue. My local newspaper in Bucks County editorialized against it. But to me, what I see is a lot of folks get to Washington and they get so enthralled about the power. They want to be there to be something powerful and special. To me, the greatest thing I did was serve in the company of heroes in Baghdad, Iraq, or Tuzla, Bosnia. To serve in Congress was an awesome opportunity to give back. I served 2 terms. I did the GI Bill, did the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, raised the minimum wage, did some other things. But I will tell you, I didn't know if I was going to be there for 2 years or 20 years, but I said I was going to make every day count. And when I lost, I didn't cry my Wheaties. I said, hey, I barely won my first time. I won by a lot my second time. I lost my third time. But, I said to myself, it was an honor and a privilege to serve. I feel like I made my mark, but I was ready to go to the next chapter. I didn't ever run for Congress again. And, now I'm a entrepreneur and do other things.
So we talked about your military service. We talked about public service, government service. And then you made another significant step in your career, which was you ended up becoming, for a while, the acting Secretary of the Army and then Undersecretary of the Army. To put this in perspective for people, 1.3 million people in the Army and government and civilian, military and civilian, a budget of $148 billion, the largest employer of millennials in the country. So what was that like? I mean, that's a pretty big step change from being an altar boy, a hockey player, to really running a huge business enterprise.
Yeah, but I still brought that row house mentality. And I was taking care of the people on my left and right. When the Washington Post referred to me as the soldier secretary, because I would go and I would PT with troops. So even
I remember your videos. And I remember, a lot of times you see people on social media. Sorry to cut you off. But a lot of times you see executive handshaking and meeting with CEOs and things like that. And I remember most of your videos were literally meeting with troops doing PT, physical training.
When you're out there, and I was in Afghanistan, Iraq, I'm meeting troops. We would get in at 0300 and I would show up with PT and I was tired. But you know what? They were tired from a deployment. I was like, I'm going to make this count. I was going to meet the generals. I was going to get the PowerPoint slides. I was going to be on the front line, all that. But I said, hey, on that hour every day, the common denominator is every soldier, every warrior has to do physical fitness. Right. And I was out there, and I remember weeks into the job, I was out there, having one of the troops there over my shoulder doing a fireman's carry in Afghanistan. And to me, it was sending a message to them, too, that I loved them and that I cared for them, but I want to hear from them. My grandmom and my mother always remind my brother, sister, and I that God gave us 2 ears, but only one mouth for a reason. So I was there to hear what they were griping about, hear what their thoughts were, hear how they thought things were going, and then see if that married up to the ground truth of what their commanders were saying to me as well.
Well, I think they had to appreciate the fact that you were their representative to the United States Army, to the Joint Chiefs of Staff, to the DOD, not just a public servant that was in a position, but in a sense, somebody was really appreciating us, so we're representing us properly.
Yeah, it would be neat when you go there and, and I would eat chow with them and stuff, and they would be like, they would say, hey, thanks for the GI Bill, I'm using it, my wife's using it, or my kids are using it, or, hey, I happen to be gay, so thanks for fighting for folks like me, or, hey, it's good to see one of our own, being this type of role. And that to me was important, and I always try to give back. When I was doing those videos, it was to send a message to the moms and dads back at home, like, hey, we care about your sons and daughters. They're incredible treasures that you've given our country. And we were going to do everything possible to make sure they didn't have a fair fight. I would say to them, I'd say, listen, if your son or daughter joins the American military, they're not going to have a fair fight. They're going to have the tactical and the technical advantage over enemy. They're coming home because they're defending this nation, they're defending our families. But I also let them know that, hey, thank you for serving. Do the job the best way you can. Get home safe. And when you come home and when you get out of the uniform, we expect you to be a soldier for life, a leader of character for a lifetime of service.
Yeah, we're going to talk about the VA in a second in terms of making sure we fulfill those commitments and obligations. But so in terms of what do you think was, you gave a couple of examples of you as a Congress accomplishments. How about as Secretary of the Army? If you had to point out one or two things, where do you think you made a difference? What makes you most?
Yeah, I would say, first of all, I made sure that the military-civilian relationship was a good one. And we led by example. So it was the time the four-star general was Mark Milley, went to Princeton University, was a hockey player, class of 1980. All of us hockey players remember that 1980 group. They won, they beat the Russians in the Olympics. That was 7-year-old, that was a defining moment in my life.
Thank you.
That underdog mentality. And then I served in combat with him right after 9/11 when he was a colonel and I was a captain. And then never on the Army with him. We testified in front of John McCain, who I know is a personal hero of yours, mine. I know the viewers know your story, John McCain in Vietnam, and Ralph, that's why you are a personal hero to many of us. But to go in front of John McCain during a defining moment, he would ask Mark Milley and I, and we had to comment on the Marine Corps and others, hey, why are you all opening up every job to women? Because women couldn't serve in combat before. Why are you opening up things like Ranger School? We're going to have two different standards. And we testified under oath. We said, Senator McCain, Mr. Chairman, most women that want to go to Ranger School, if they get there, they're not going to be able to pass it. Most guys who want to go to Ranger School, when they get there, they're not going to pass it either. Like, we're not changing the standard, sir. But give every American that wears the cloth of our country the opportunity to serve and how they best think they're going to do it if they meet the standard. And we've had women like Lisa Jaster, other women that I've seen pass it. I have a young guy, Brendan Toole, who is about to graduate this Friday at Fort Benning, Georgia. Mm-hmm. I served in the Army with his father. His sister serves in one of the intelligence agencies. They were from the Coal Cracker region of Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. He now is a young guy. He actually went to Princeton. He became an Army officer. He went to Sandhurst over in Europe, in England. Just got done in Ranger School and he's graduating this week. These are the type of young Americans that I get to still interact with, even though I'm not in the Pentagon anymore, that just fill me up and make me want to work harder and make me feel like, man, I'm not doing anything with my life. If I want to be like, Ralph Galati, I want to be like people like Mark Milley, or Lisa Jaster. These are folks that you just are around them. And just like the folks, the guys and gals I served in Iraq with, I texted them this morning on National Airborne Day, the ones in Virginia, the ones in Texas, but I sent them the picture of us on top of our Humvee and said, hey guys, at the time I was in infantry units, it was all men. I said, hey guys, happy National, Airborne Day. But it's that camaraderie and that sense of purpose and greatness that you get to experience when you serve with them.
And in your business role, you see veterans, obviously troops that become veterans that are becoming successful business people. So what kind of attributes are you seeing that this military background has given them that make them a valued asset for a company to want to hire them?
Well, the great thing about veterans in the military is, one, you're going to know they're going to show up on time, they're going to be physically fit, and they're going to know how to take orders. They're going to be team players and they understand what selfless service is all about. It's those soft leadership skills that they're going to have on day one. Whether they're private first class or general, they're going to bring that, and they're going to bring those attributes there to the workforce. Number two, no one's going to work harder. They're used to working long hours. They're used to, they're not punching some clock, because you don't do that in the military, as you know, Ralph. And so, that to me is something else. But three, it's that confidence that they understand if they have a business plan, they're gonna plan their work, and they're gonna work their plan. And that plan, if it's a solid one, will be successful. More successful, frankly, than their civilian counterparts. And that's why you see places like Wharton or Harvard Business School, they want these young Americans that serve to come through their doors. to graduate from the best business schools in the world.
The issue of veteran suicide. I know just in the past couple of weeks, we announced 988 as a national veteran hotline. The VA has had their own 800 hotline. What did you see when you were Secretary of the Army? What do you get a sense of today in terms of either the underlying conditions or messages you could give to family members that might put them on call as to what to look for one of their veterans maybe recently coming back from a deployment, or even just somebody after 20-some years retiring?
Yeah. Three things. One, I would say physical health is just as important as mental health. It's really important that folks realize that your mental health, it's like a muscle, and you got to recognize where you're strong and where you're weak and how you can get better. And I think doing things like a purpose-driven life is helpful for folks if they have that. Number two, you have to make it more accessible. So when I ran the Army, we changed it so we had embedded behavioral health teams. Changing that stigma, getting rid of it. Why is that important? If you want to go see a mental health professional in the Army before, you have to go to the hospital. Subconsciously, you go to the hospital when you're sick. So we did embedded behavioral health teams. What was that? We had psychologists, psychiatrists, social workers, farmed out within units. They're at PT in the morning. Mm-hmm. They're in the company area, not at some clinic. And just, hey, Ralph, how's it going? What's new? My wife just left me. Oh, hey, you want to come and talk about it? Like that's a pretty traumatic life experience. Yeah, would you mind? Like just being proactive, not just reactive.
Well, there was always a stigma too attached to that.
Right. And the third thing I think is letting veterans know what's out there. Besides just the 988, the majority of our veterans, and roughly about 22 a day, take their own life, as you know. The majority of those 22 are not in the VA system. We got to make it easier for them to use the VA or use private sector healthcare. Let them know, like, hey, still, might not be in the military anymore, but you're still a soldier for life or an airman for life. So follow what we call the performance triad. You got to eat right, you got to sleep right, and you got to exercise. I think when you do those things, it helps you get through or gut through some of the things necessary. I mean, the stats and studies will show, if you wake up in the morning and even if you're working from home, if you're working with your pajamas on, that tells your body something like you're working, you're sleeping, don't work in your bedroom. Little things like that make a big difference.
I want to thank Patrick Murphy for sharing, not just for today, but for your continued service to our community and our veterans. We covered a lot of ground. It's now time for our audience to take some action. So Patrick gave you some really great advice in terms of not just with the VA, but in terms of public service, job opportunities, entrepreneurship. Everything is out there. We're providing a little bit of outreach, but it's time for you veterans in our audience, but also family members, spouses, and dependents to really look at the opportunities available to your veteran, get them enrolled in the VA, whatever benefits they are eligible for. Look at opportunities for community service, the opportunity to continue to serve, but also the opportunity just to help a veteran. If you find a veteran, talk to a veteran, thank them for their service, but then also find a way to help them. Even if it's just prodding them along to take the next step. So thank you very much again for joining us today.
Thanks, Ralph. Thanks for being like my older brother with always your mentorship and guidance, and you're a great American, buddy. So thanks for having me on.
It's a great honor. Thanks.